Hey guys, Trev from the Struggling Artist Podcast, and I want to talk to you real quick about Struggling Artist Record Club. The Struggling Artist Record Club is a vinyl record subscription service where I hunt and curate the best punk and punk-adjacent music out there and mail their record to your door each and every month. Imagine finding your new favorite band from across the country without ever having to leave the house. It doesn't get much better than that. The excitement of discovering new music just got that much easier. As a member of the Struggling Artist Record Club, you are going to receive some of the best music you've ever heard from bands you may never even heard of. Whether you've been collecting records for years or just starting out, the Struggling Artist Record Club is designed specifically for you. And right now, all new members get a Struggling Artist Record Club exclusive along with the monthly selection. So head to StrugglingArtistRecordClub.com, pick a membership, and start building that collection today.
You're listening to the Struggling Artist Podcast.
People need to be entertained. They need the distraction.
With your host, Trev Allen.
I wish to God that somebody would do something to block out the voices in my head for 5 minutes.
Hello, everybody. Today, our guest is one of the owners of DyingScene.com, Jay Stone. We talk about the website, the past, present, and future of it. We talk about Jay's photography, which is absolutely phenomenal. And if you don't know what Dying Scene is, you got to go check it out. It is one of my favorite online sources for music, news, and reviews. This is episode 271 of the Struggling Artist Podcast, Struggling with Dying Scene.
Yep.
That's all going now, and we're here. And thanks again for coming on here and talking with me, Jay.
Of course. It didn't give the record thing on my end. Did it do it? It usually.
Oh yeah, I'm not recording through Zoom. I go.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it run through like an interface and all that stuff. So
gotcha.
Yeah,
it's all fancy.
It works. It works a little bit better. Yeah, I mean, I actually just recently upgraded, and it was like I've been doing this. Like I relaunched in early 2020, like January.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm at the point now where I was like, all right, I'm in this thing. Like I might as well, I'm going to upgrade some equipment and get things going a little bit better. And and here we are. You
right.
know?
Awesome.
So I don't know. When did we met at Deep Cuts, right? Is that when
I think so?
We
yeah. I think officially.
Met? Yeah. I remember seeing you at the Taffeta show.
Yeah.
That was an amazing show.
That was a great show. And I hadn't been to Lowell for a show in, I can't remember how long. And so it's nice to you get so used to going to shows in the city. So it's nice when you don't have to travel in the city and it's still the same group of friends, but you can hang out at new, cool places. And yeah, that was a great lineup, especially for the locals, you know?
Yeah. And the venue was really good there. Like that's a awesome venue. It was huge.
Yeah, it is much bigger than I thought it was.
Yeah, it wasn't
awesome.
like it wasn't too hot, wasn't too cold. It was,
right.
It was a pretty. I'm hoping they do a lot more there. I haven't seen anything on the docket yet, but
yeah, sound was pretty good. Like the lighting was pretty good for a venue of that size, and really a venue that's like black inside is like a dark cavern inside. Yeah. So taking pictures is like, ooh, I don't know how this is going to work, but it looked really cool.
Yeah. So going into taking pictures at shows, so you have to take all that into consideration.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. And all prefaced by the fact that I am like the rankest of amateurs when it comes to taking pictures at shows. I sort of, I guess, stole is the best word for it. So my wife had a camera 10 or 12 years ago, probably. And I forget why she got it, just wanted to take pictures. And I was like, well, I want to do more stuff like in and around the scene because I don't play music really like ever outside of my bedroom. And so I wanted to do more stuff in and around the scene. And Dying Scene, I had been with the website and we can get into that later, but I had been with the website for a couple of years at that point. I was like, I want to start shooting shows. Like, we don't have enough show photographers. I want to be able to like document the scene. And I'm like incredibly socially awkward. So it gives me something to do, like something to hold in my hands, and like I can hide behind the camera. So I sort of stole her camera. It was early 2013, I think, is when I first really started shooting shows and didn't know what I was doing. And 11 years later, I'm on a camera of my own now and still don't know what I'm doing.
Well, your pictures are phenomenal. So you're doing something right if you don't know.
Well, and I just got this new camera because the one that I had stolen from my wife officially like died, and I don't really know enough about cameras to know what died about it, but I just know that it doesn't work anymore. So then I was like, well, we're at a crossroads here. Like, do I continue with photography and actually spend more money on it, or do I just let other people do it? And I said, well, no, like, because I'm still haven't gotten over the socially awkward thing, and I like documenting the scene, so I guess I'll buy a new camera. And I got used to the 12 or 13-year-old camera I had been using, and so technology has progressed since then. And so I got this new one. It's like a controller for a spaceship or something. I'm like, I don't know what to do. It's got touch screens, and like, I don't know what to do. And I think maybe, what show was that at Deep Cuts? Was that the Drowns show?
Yes. It was the Drowns, River City Rebels.
That was like 2 days after I got the camera. So that's the first show I shot with that camera.
Nice.
And that, when I think, did River City Rebels, were they first maybe in my brain anyway?
I think they were. Yeah, I think they were first. Yeah.
Yeah. And I turned the camera on. I was like, oh shit. Like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Oh, you hadn't even turned it on at that? That was the first
No,
time?
that like I turned it on at the store to make sure. Actually, I couldn't even do that because it didn't have a battery. I had to order a battery from Amazon because I bought like an open box one because I decided, well, I'm going to spend money on. I'm not going to spend that much money on it.
Right.
So I got an open box one. So I had to order a battery from Amazon to make sure that the camera worked. And so I did that, realized the camera works, and said, well, here we go. And so those were the very first pictures I took with that camera.
Wow,
That's
awesome. That's awesome. That was a good show. That was a good show.
That was fun. I really like Deep Cuts.
Yeah, that was my first time there too, and like it was awesome. I went back for the Iron Roses, and it was just as fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a really
we went to
really good room.
Ways Away and Mercy Union, whatever, a couple weeks ago now. That place is so cool.
I didn't even know Mercy Union was in town. God damn it.
Yeah, they opened for Ways Away.
These goddamn algorithms.
I know, really.
I decided to start a Discord because I was like, I missed like Time and Place was doing like a matinee at the Midway, and I missed it, and I didn't know, and I was like, so I was like, I'm gonna start a Discord. I haven't done anything with it. Like it's all this shit's hard for me. Like
it's a whole new thing. Yeah, we started Discord to communicate with all the writers and contributors on Dying Scene because it's easier that way. Because I can't manage like email and somebody only has Facebook Messenger and somebody's only on Snapchat and somebody's not. We can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't have 47 different places that I'm checking for messages to be like, we're going to put it all on Discord and we're all going to learn it together and it'll be really good and it's free and it's easy and it's great. Like it works super well if you just convince yourself to use it.
Yeah. So when Discord was like, I remember I used to write for a website for like horror movies, and we were able to do like, we were like the beta testing for Discord.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the owner of the website, he's a huge tech guy, like first adapter on everything. So he got invited to do this. So we were like on there early on, and we just used it for that feature. I didn't realize what you could do with it now. There's so much you can do with it. I'm trying. We're getting there.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely. How long have you been with Dying Scene?
So I was thinking about this the other day, and I do this periodically. So the website itself started, it'll be 15 years this year. It was August of 2009. A guy called Dave Buck started it because he wanted like an alternative to punk news, basically, and for a variety of reasons. And so I became a reader probably late 2009. A friend of mine actually from another message board, because this was like 2009, 2010 was still like prime MySpace and like band message board era. So a friend of mine from a band message board, shout out to Viva Death, she turned me on to this site. She said, "Oh, I know you don't really care for punk news. Here's another cool thing, though." So I started reading it probably 2010. And then the guy, Dave, the site kept growing and growing and growing. And he kept putting out Facebook or MySpace, I guess, messages saying, like, every now and then about people joining. And so I think my first official shift on Dying Scene, because we had shifts, like 3-hour shifts. There were four or five 3-hour shifts every day of the week, and then weekend shifts. It was wild, but it was January of 2011. So my daughter had just turned 3, and she's 16 now. So yeah, 13 and a half years now. And then I took over the role of like press coordinator. In 2013, started shooting shows in 2013, and then effectively bought the site, me and another kid called Cricket, who lives out in Denver, who had been a longtime contributor. So Dave, who started the site, here's the 25-cent version of the history of Dying Scene. Like, so he started the site. He was in on MySpace, like he worked for MySpace early on, and for a while had a real lot of free time. So he essentially built the site from the ground up. And he had a friend who was also in MySpace, I think, and did a lot of the back end stuff. And Dave doesn't really do back end stuff. He just knew how we wanted the site to function and look and all that. So he and his friend would meet up and have a couple beers and built a website, basically. And then it grew and grew and grew and grew. The friend, unfortunately, it was all built on WordPress, which it still is, but and the friend was doing all the WordPress updates. Well, the friend unfortunately passed away somewhat untimely, probably like 2016 or 2017, something like that. And if you or anybody listening has ever worked with WordPress, like you have to constantly be updating your WordPress.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it'll become too clogged and top heavy and all the plugins will stop working, et cetera, et cetera. So that happened after a while, like 2019-ish, let's say. And it eventually just caved in on itself. In the meantime, Dave had moved he was living in LA at the time. He had moved to New York and then to South Africa. So he has a really good job in South Africa, but he's also got a wife and 2 kids now. And so once the website sort of on the back end became inoperable, he tried a couple times to have people resurrect it, but people would realize that it was just like they were in over their heads with it. So, and it was becoming too tough for him to maintain from South Africa and the rest of the teams in the States. And then so trying to hire a developer, but there's like 6 or 8 or 12 hours, depending on where you are, like time delays and all that, and wife, kids, full-time job, et cetera, et cetera. So me and Cricket, we started doing more with the podcast stuff just so we could have content and keep the name alive. And then eventually Cricket and I were like, do you want us to just take it over? And he's like, if you guys want to do it, it's yours. So like the LLC transfer over and all that stuff. So then in late 2021, probably, I think, we officially like took it over, hired a new developer, relaunched it. And so it's been ours the last couple of years.
I mean, it's one of my favorites to go to. It's
appreciate that.
Yeah, and I remember like there was a moment. It might have been when you guys took it over. Like, were you looking for podcasts and stuff at one time? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
So I remember Jeff Bousquet actually hit me up about that, and I was checking out the podcast that you guys had, and I like ended up finding one of my favorite bands from Seattle through you guys, a band called Snuggle.
Oh, okay, sure.
And then from there, I learned about like the frontman Jerome. He had this other thing, it's like this duo called Pipsqueak, and I started listening to that, and it's like,
oh, that's awesome.
It's so cool, yeah. So like, and then I'm like, and then like I talked to like Rev from the Drowns, like, have you heard it? And he's like, oh yeah, I know them. They're awesome. You know. So so I always liked the site, and it's like, it's tough, right? So like I said, I wrote for modernhorrors.com, and that was like the only site at the I would really go to, you know what I mean, for horror stuff, because there's so many, like there is an oversaturation of these websites that call themselves like review sites and stuff that, and a lot of the time reviews get like kind of, I don't know how to, they get like, there's too much opinion sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
And why I liked Modern Horrors is because they would tell you if it's an opinion as opposed to a review, or even if there was an opinion in the review, it would be known. And then, you know, so like I always looked for sites that were better at reviewing than you know, all the ones that are out there. And and Dying Scene is one of those. Like I read one of your reviews recently and I like wrote it down. I'm like, that's it. Like, you know, I wrote down, ask about the art of writing a good review, because like,
yeah,
it's, you can be, and we talk about this when we do like our roundtable episodes and stuff like that. Like, I don't need to like something to realize that it's good. You know what I mean? It
took me a while to come to that realization, but yes, absolutely right.
So tell me, like, how do you approach when you do a review?
So I don't do album reviews much anymore so I did a lot of them, and I became sort of the lead reviewer not long after I started, like 2011, 2012. Learned about a lot of cool new bands that way. Did, I don't know, 150 or something album reviews. And then I got to a point where I felt like I was becoming redundant. Like there's only like punk rock, there's a fairly wide umbrella, but it's still under the same umbrella. And so there's only so many ways that you can, like so many adjectives you could use for what like a rapid fire drum beat sounds like, or chugging guitars or angsty vocals. And I just I ran out of words basically to say. So I'll still do album reviews from time to time if there's something that really moves me. But so I had a buddy back when I was starting with Dying Scene who was a film reviewer, and he wrote for Boston.com and had his own film thing. And so we would sort of trade notes. And he sort of is the one who told me, like, sort of taught me how to appreciate something for what it is. And whether or not you like it, you can still try to look from like a 10,000-foot view and figure out what the band is going for and what sound they're going for. And then how well do they do that? And so it doesn't have to be your wheelhouse necessarily. Like I couldn't necessarily probably review a pop country album because I don't know what the hell I'm listening to, and to me it all sounds the same. My ears don't work that way. But within the umbrella of punk rock, like you can sort of tell what somebody's going for, and then like, do they do it well? And so that was always kind of how I approached album reviews. Show reviews, I just started writing because I've always thought that I was a writer. I've had people tell me, like, I don't think I'm a particularly good writer, but people have told me that they like reading my writing. So I said, well, I guess I'll be a writer. But I liked taking pictures, and then I didn't want to put just photo galleries up. So then it became show reviews, and I started over basically in what I knew about reviews. Because doing a show review is very different than doing an album review.
Yeah,
I guess to me, I mean, it's sort of like if you were doing a movie review versus doing a theater review or like a play review.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so to me, I don't know, I'm still so much a fan of the music, and I only go to shows that I want to go to, which sounds like a kind of elitist thing, I guess, to say, but like, I don't have a lot of time. Right. I'm in my mid-40s. I have like a real job. I have a wife and a child who's like learning how to drive and all that. So I don't have an awful lot of time. So I only go to things that I want to go to. So I do have to be conscious sometimes of dialing down the fanboy thing. Like I went to see Lucero last night up in New Hampshire.
I know.
And it was my 20th Lucero show. And I would follow that band into battle. And I have to remember when I'm writing a review of that, like, I'll just own it. Like if I'm a fan of a band, if I'm a super fan of a band, like there's no way for me to write about it objectively. So I will just own it. Like dive in with both feet. Like, look, this is my 20th Pearl Jam show. Pearl Jam. Yeah. Because I'm going to see them. So that's on the brain too. This is my 20th Lucero show. And like people know then that you're like the guy who likes Lucero. And so just view things from that perspective. Like, what did the band do well? Was the sound good? Like, how's the venue? The place I went to last night was a venue that I'd never been to before. So then, like, how does that sound? Because I've seen Lucero in a shit ton of different venues. So how does like their sound play into that venue? How does it work for that size venue, for that sort of crowd, et cetera, et cetera? So I try to approach things that way. But I like I can't deny, or I try to be public about the fact that like I'm only reviewing bands that I like. So I'm not going to shit on a band really.
Right.
If I do a review. And that's been one of the cardinal rules that we sort of have at the site since relaunching it. And it kind of was before too, but there are certainly bands that don't need our help, right? Like the Misfits, like the Misfits don't need Dying Seeds help, right. Like, or Green Day or whatever. So if somebody reviews the Green Day record and doesn't like it, good. Tell people why you don't like it and be objective about why you don't like it. Not just, oh, this record sucks, but like, what don't you like about it?
Yes. Yeah.
But for smaller bands, for bands that hit us up to review their records, we've kind of adapted a rule, like don't punch down. So like if it's a band, like it's probably better off for us to just not review it than it is to write a shitty review about a band that has, 47 followers on Bandcamp or something. Like what? Yeah. Like if we trash them, then like that seems bad. But if it's a band, don't be afraid to punch up. So if there's a band that a bigger band, so one of the most read stories since we relaunched the site was a kid in Florida, Dylan, reviewed. I think Jerry Only from the Misfits put out a record within the last year, and it's bad. It's objectively not good. Right. And he kind of took a dump on it, and that story like went viral. Like how big a steaming pile of turd Jerry Only's record was. Not Jerry Only as a person, but Jerry Only's record. Like it was garbage.
Yeah. You can tell when there's,
because again, like he doesn't need our help,
right?
And so if you think it's bad, just lean into that it's bad.
And sometimes at that level, like there's a cash grab just to push something out there, right? So yeah, and
exactly.
Yeah, and I feel like you could, like that's warranted. If you're doing that, it's going to come with a certain price. But for some band that that's just starting out or whatever, like you're saying, like it's like you can't. Like they're putting their heart and soul. When you put your heart and soul into something 100% and like, and then you get, you don't want to get trashed. I mean, there's a critique is fine, but like, you don't want to trash anybody, So.
Yeah. And I remember exchanging messages. I think it was still back in the MySpace days with a band who I had, did a review of their record and I didn't like it. I didn't think it was very good. But this is sort of what helped mold my opinion of how to write a review going forward. I didn't think the record was particularly good, and it was a small band, and I probably wasn't doing them any favors by reviewing that I did. I mean, I was still objective about it. There were things that I liked, but there were definitely things that I didn't. But there were also things that I didn't get. Like there were references in song titles. The band's name, I think, was even a throwback to like a Replacements song, and I never listened to the Replacements, so I don't know. And so there were I said a couple things that were like, oh, such and such, like this is a weird title or this is a weird phrasing in a song, like it doesn't make sense to me. And the kid's like, yep, I'm literally quoting like a Replacements song or something like that. I'm like, I don't know that. So,
right.
Like, so we kind of went back and forth a little bit about that, and I was just like, maybe I shouldn't write bad reviews about bands that are smaller.
Yeah. I know. I did a I mean, when I was writing for Modern Horrors, like I'm not reviewing like theater movies. Like I'm reviewing stuff like Clown Town, like these movies that,
right.
Clown with a K, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
So like you kind of had to have, like I had to have fun with it. So like I would make the most outrageous things that would end up being like pull quotes, but like but if you're looking at like, what was the director's like motivation here, and what were they trying to accomplish? Like that's that's how I learned how to write reviews, is by kind of looking from the outside, and
that sort of 10,000 foot view of like, what are you going for here? And then did you do it? Like there, you can make a good, bad movie. Like, right. Especially in the horror genre and the trauma films and all that.
I always say, like, the scale's 1 to 10 for, like, good movies, and you don't want to be under a 5 if you're a good movie. But there's a scale that goes from 0 to -10, and it's all fair game in there. Like, it's all fun in there. Like, that you're meaning to do what you're doing if you're in that below scale,
Right.
So, I did a show review. So, I'll never say who wrote it, but someone wrote a show review, a local I don't know, a local scene source wrote a show review that I was at, and it was so like just inaccurate.
Interesting.
And I was just like, you know what? Like I can't let, because it was a really good show, and I was like, I can't let that be the only documentation on this thing. So like, I wrote something and put it on like a blog spot or whatever. But again, like, I took that same approach as like, you know, I'm reviewing the show, I'm reviewing how the bands performed, and then at the end I had an opinion. Like I put like one more like passage in there, like with my opinion on how good I thought it was. So, but yeah, so like there was, I was just like, I can't let that be the only like documented thing of this show, because it was really good. It was a really good show. It was like back in early 2022, I think, and
you have to wonder if like, if you had such a polar opposite experience of the person who did the review, then what else did that person have going on?
Yeah.
That ruined it for them? Like, did they really think the show was bad, or did they get like a drink spilled on them at the beginning and then that just ruined their mood? Or was somebody talking and not shutting up next to them, and then so that puts you in a bad mood? Yeah. And so then and I try to be mindful, like that's all stuff that I try to be mindful of when I'm at a show that I know I'm going to be reviewing. Is how is my experience at the show clouding my opinion of the show itself? And I try to include all that. So like I try to be upfront about how I write all that stuff. And so that if I know that something is like if you're in a crowd where people won't shut up next to you, and it's really like a show where people should be quiet next to you, like as sort of a quieter, like, you know, folk punk, acoustic songwriters, that sort of thing, that will cloud your view of the show. And so you have to, like, there's a way to fuse those two things together. Like the experience of the show itself that you went through, and then like if the show was actually good. And there's definitely a way to do that. But it's not easy all the time.
I feel like whoever wrote this, like there was another band in town that was just there, like to support some of the bands. And like they didn't play, they were just there hanging out, and they talked more about like hanging out with them than they did like the show. You know what I mean? It was a rough one. And I just like, I'm like, I can't let this go. So I just wrote my own, and I was like, here, this is my experience from this, you know? So when you're taking photos, if you do a show review and you're taking photos, is there like a connection between like the photography that you're taking and then like what you're writing about? Like, do you get like when you're taking if you're taking a picture and you're like, oh, this is going to be like, you know what I'm saying?
There are times. There are moments for sure. And sometimes, like I've tried to be more hyper aware of the setting of a show from the time I walk in, really. So that I'm sort of mindful of like all those things that might piss me off, or figuring out like what things might be an angle. But there are definitely times where you're taking a picture, and people, I hate to say that taking pictures at shows is work, because it is absolutely not. Like first off, I've never made any money doing it, but it's like, even if you were making money on it, like that's a pretty awesome job to just go to punk rock shows that you want to go to and take pictures of bands that you like to see. So I use the word work in quotes, but it is work when you're taking pictures for a show that are going to be published, and when you're writing a story that's going to be published. Like it is work. And so when I'm at a show, I like to be at a show by myself generally, because I mean, like my wife and I met going to shows. So we've been to couple hundred shows together at this point, but it is a different sort of dynamic when I know that I'm working, because I'm always like, I'm writing the story in my head while I'm either shooting or while I'm just observing. Like if it was a photo pit show, so you get to shoot for like 3 songs and then you're out in the wings usually. I'm usually writing in my head, not necessarily about the way that the pictures look. Sometimes I know right away that the pictures are going to suck because of the lighting, and not every venue, even if it's a good venue, sometimes the lighting sucks. But there are some venues that are not particularly good venues, but they just happen to have good lighting. So there's always that sort of balance. But I'm always writing the show review in my head while I'm at the show. And so it's like, it's hard to sort of socialize with a lot of people and whatever that way. It's not necessarily dictated by the pictures. I do view them separately. Like my job as a photographer is to take pictures and document the goings on and whatever. My job as a writer is to write about the experience of being at that specific show. Sometimes they overlap. Like sometimes the setting of a show is so important to the piece that it shows up like in the writing. I'm trying to like, not to go back to Lucero, but like seeing Lucero, we went down to their block party in Memphis. I've been down a couple times to their annual sort of birthday party celebration, and like seeing a band like that in their hometown is like a very specific thing. And seeing them there is different than seeing them at 3S Art Space in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Both are cool, but they're very specific. They're very different experiences. So I try to sort of but like the setting of seeing Lucero there is part of the story, right? Like, and so the pictures will tell part of the story too. Going to shows like at Stone Pony in Asbury Park, they have the summer stage outside. And so like shooting Bouncing Souls with the Stone Pony as the backdrop, like on the beach in Asbury Park, like it's a thing in and of itself. I've seen the Souls a couple dozen times, but seeing them like on the beach in their hometown and the way that looks too, like pictures at that show will look very different than pictures if you see them at Royale in Boston or something like that. Like the setting itself is part of the story. So I try to be mindful of that when I'm writing. I usually view the two things separately, but sometimes you can't help it. Like sometimes like the venue itself, whether because of historic purposes or personal purposes, like is part of the story.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: like, you're from New Hampshire originally? Is that what you're
born and raised in Nashua, New Hampshire?
I like your like bio thing on Dying Scene, because it's like, if you're not from Boston, I'm from Boston, but if you are from Boston, I live on the North Shore and I'm from New Hampshire.
Yes, exactly.
Oh man! So did you grow up like listening to the local music and everything?
I've thought about this occasionally. We didn't have much in Nashua specifically. Like we had bands.
I didn't have much in Westerly, Rhode Island either.
Exactly. So we didn't have much of a scene. There was a coffee house that had shows every now and then, but it wasn't really a thing. There would be like junior high and high school battles of the bands and things like that, but it was like all different sounds, and it was the early '90s, so there was a lot of alternative stuff like Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots sort of cover bands, or like Fish Dead, because it's still New Hampshire. Like that sort of sound cover bands. So we didn't really have that. So when we went to shows, when I started going to shows in high school, it was generally Boston, but it was also like Worcester, Providence occasionally. I think statute of limitations. Like I can tell my parents, like I did go to like Rhode Island on school nights sometimes to go to shows. Portsmouth to the Elvis Room, which was a pretty awesome venue back in the mid '90s. But we didn't have anything in Nashua really growing up where there were local shows. So the scene just became whoever was coming through, really. And not wanting to go out a whole lot and not having the resources to go out a whole lot, it would generally be like you'd start to see local shows a little bit. Like Showcase Showdown was sort of big in the mid '90s around here, and so, or like early Dropkicks. And I know, like, I hate dropping names or whatever, but like early Dropkick shows where they would be opening for like the Pie Tasters or whatever. Like that was sort of, it was really perfect time and place to be in the scene. And then I moved to Boston when I went to college. So every show was a local show. But it was it was like that perfect time that like the Boss Tones were big, the Dropkicks were sort of coming up, like Bruisers were still sort of around. It was like in like that.
Yeah, the unseen,
ska-core,
right?
Big D and Big D and the Kids Table, like that whole scene was as I was finishing high school, moving to college. So it was like perfect time to be moving into the scene itself.
Yeah, that's how I discovered all this stuff. Was just I happened to go. My buddy's like, "Hey, you want to go see this band called the Dropkick Murphys?" And the Ducky Boys opened, and then And then, you know, I just started listening to like, what's going on up there? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
what is this? Like, all we have are cover bands, you know? So,
Right.
and the few bands that like were doing their own thing, like they kind of were like more like that New Haven, New York kind of, you know, hardcore stuff. And that was good too. But like, there wasn't a lot of places where we were that you could go, you know what I mean, to see it. So I just,
it was like Providence or nothing, basically, right? If you were in Westerly.
And even with Providence, like I didn't really get into like the scene there. I'd go to, my first show was Capleton and Anthony B, like dancehall reggae. Like,
oh wow!
at Lupo's when the Heartbreak,
the old Lupo's.
Yeah. So like my first shows, were like dancehall reggae stuff, and I love that stuff, and I still do. But like when I got into punk, like I think the first show I went to was the Strand, maybe for the punk, for punk or Avalon in Boston, and
that's where my first punk rock show was.
Yeah, I think it was at the Avalon in Boston. It was the first time I saw like the Dropkick Murphys was there, and like I said, like just this whole like, what is this Boston? Like to me, Boston like that whole street rock era has like a specific sound that I absolutely love. So like, I just like, this was my thing. This was what I wanted. You know what I mean? So being you know, I'm in my 40s and I'm in the mix, I guess, you know, like, you know, it took me a while to realize I'm like in the mix, but I am, but it's like, it's cool. And like friends I've made, like, you know, much younger Trev would have been like, what? You know what I'm saying?
I have said that 1,000 times. Like 15, 16, 17-year-old me is so jealous of 44-year-old me who like you just said is like, has only recently come to realize that like I am part of the mix or the scene or whatever, because I don't. And that's when you sort of realize, I forget who said this. I don't know. I don't remember if it was in it, because I've done so many interviews. That's kind of what I got into and became my thing, was doing artist interviews and writing stories. And then that turned into its own podcast thing. But I forget who said it, but it's like at some point you realize that, oh, everybody's full of shit. Like all the people that you had like on pedestals or that you like looked at as part of the scene, like once you become part of it, you're like, oh, everybody's just making it up as they go along. Like even everybody that's part of the scene, they're like, we don't know. And if you,
one of the big things too, like when I talk to people on the podcast, and like, in the beginning, like it was especially when it became like a music podcast, but like, I was like, wait, everyone has imposter syndrome. Like, no one feels worthy to be like what they're doing. And I was like, this is like it. Like, this is what this podcast is. You know what I'm saying? Like,
that's kind of where I feel that's indicative of like this scene in particular. Like, because like, I don't know, in the punk rock scene, and I hesitate to call myself part of the punk rock scene, but whatever. I've been with Dying Seed for 14 years. So, like, they'll call you on your bullshit, right? So like if you get too far out over your skis, like people will call you on your bullshit, and you like that stuff goes away or gets, I think, taken out of your vocabulary early on, I think, if you stay part of the scene. And then you just end up with a bunch of us with imposter syndrome, like you said.
Yeah. And I think one thing I've noticed too over the last, 4 years is like people who complain like the most about the community here aren't willing to be in it. And that's why they're complaining. You know what I mean? Like they're looking for, I don't know. I don't want to say they don't want it. Like they're working hard at their art, but like there's just like they're looking for like an out, and they just want to blame when it doesn't happen. Yeah. And you know what I mean? So, which is any industry anywhere, right? People are always looking to pass the buck, right? They just,
Yeah, of course. And I think that we're sort of in the same age bracket, obviously, but I think bands that we grew up listening to that are still doing it, if they're not the upper echelon, like if they're not Green Day or Offspring, who have their own private jets and pilots to fly them, like if they're below that, like for most guys at this point, they've come to the realization that they're not going to really probably be able to do this full time. Yeah. So they have like another gig too. And I think, and it seems like that's obviously a big obstacle to sort of confront. But once you confront it, then it seems like I look at a band like the Bouncing Souls, like they were road warriors for a long time, but none of those guys do only Bouncing Souls now. And I think once they came to that realization that like we're gonna have to do other stuff.
Yeah.
So let's not play 250 shows a year. Let's play 50 shows a year, make them awesome. And so then we're not relying on it. And then like once you come to that realization, I think that so much of what the scene is made up of now is people like in that boat.
Yeah.
Like essentially most bands I think that we listen to are in that boat.
I had Flatfoot 56 on recently, and they said the same thing. Like, you know, like they did the 250 shows a year. I'm like, Jesus, like, you know, when they said that, I was like, oh, you know, and like, they're like,
and you either blow up catastrophically, or you say, okay, this like we're going to blow up, so let's figure out a way to make this a long-term thing. Chuck and well, really, all the Hot Water Music guys have sort of said the same thing. Like they broke up once, got back together, broke up again, got back together again. But at the second time they got back together, it was like once we realized we don't have to break up, we can just play a couple dozen shows a year, put out albums, and still be a band. But as soon as like once it stops becoming the only thing, and we give each other like the grace to have lives outside of the band, then the band never has to break up. Right.
And it becomes fun again.
You know? I would think so.
Yeah. So, all right. So, and a part of this is like you were saying, like we're in the same age group, right? So like we were there where like radio was romanticized, right? Like terrestrial radio and like, and music, just musicians were like, I romanticized, like I thought, you know, all the bands I listened to were like millionaires. You know what I'm saying? Like
absolutely.
Because like I mean, how could they not be? Their art is so good, right? Like why aren't you know? And then you learn about how the record industry is and how and how radio is. Like radio did the same. They did the same exact thing, you know. And now it's like there's not a whole lot out there. It's still there, but like you know, I remember like just. You don't make the same money you do in radio like you did then, you know what I'm saying? It's just not there. Like it's corporations get involved and everything, you know? So like, what do you like, did you ever like want to get involved in any of that? Like, so I went to radio and TV, like broadcasting school and I wanted to get into radio. And once I got out of school, I realized like, it's all about who you know to get in, you know, it was a tough, so like, I thought I had an in at like a radio station. And then that guy got fired, so they didn't hire me. So I just kind of like, all right, let's go find something else to do with my life. You know what I mean? So, you know, but like, was any of that, like, did you have any kind of visions of that or?
Writing. Yeah, I wanted to be a journalist. Going back to even high school. And I took journalism classes in high school and I liked writing. I've always liked writing. And again, I don't, like, it's probably the imposter thing we were talking about, right? But I don't always like reading my own writing or think that I'm very good at it, but I always try and I always try to like get better at it. And so when it came time to pick a college, I was debating between two majors, one of them being journalism, but it was also, so it was late 90s and like it was sort of the beginning of, not the beginning of the internet, because that's like, I'm not ancient, but it was sort of like the beginning of that a little bit of a transformation, and like newspapers themselves were scaling down a little bit, not to the extent that they are now, obviously, but there was like a shift in journalism itself, music journalism, local journalism, whatever. And I said, well, I don't really know how long I'm going to be able to do that. Like, is being a journalist, like an investigative reporter or whatever, is that going to have, unless you're the best of the best,
right?
Like, are you going to be able to make a career out of that? And so I chose criminal justice as my major for undergrad, thinking that I would have a lot more like longer term career opportunities in that field. And I don't want to say instantly regretted it because that's not entirely accurate, but there was definitely a part of me that not regretted that decision, but wished that I had done more with the journalism side and the writing side instead, which ultimately is one of the reasons that I decided to get back involved in it and with Dying Scene back in 2011. Because like that part of my brain had atrophied to such an extent that I was like missing out really. And so I knew I didn't have to make, sort of like we were talking about with the music business, right? With the musicians, like I knew I wasn't going to have to make a living at it. And that has very much been a thing that I've been conscious of. Because there have been people at times, they're like, oh, you're a good writer, you should submit for like Rolling Stone or whatever. And I'm like, I don't want to have to write. I want to write because I want to write. I want to do the music thing because I want to do it, not because I have to. Because I think once it becomes your job, you get so jaded in like making sure that you're hustling to pay the bills, whether it's to pay a staff, whether it's to pay for, like I run into it now with just hosting a website. Like that's enough of a thing to make me go, fuck this all. Yep. But the part about wanting to do it, then it keeps you sort of like the passion for it, because I don't have to do it. And so I think that kind of made me come to a good balance I can still do it. I can still be part of the scene. I can still do the sort of journalism thing, but I don't have to. If I want to stop, I'll stop. If I don't want to go to a show, I won't go to a show. If I don't want to write something, I won't write something. Or if I don't want to interview somebody, I won't interview somebody. And so I can sort of sharpen that part of my brain still, or at least keep it from atrophying more. But yeah, I definitely wanted to do it, but I also didn't see, like, I only wanted to write about stuff that I wanted to write about.
Yeah, that's
and
the
unless
tough
you're
part.
David Foster Wallace was like the guy, like he was the guy back then. He was like my favorite writer, essayist, etc. And so unless you're him, like, then you're probably not going to be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had the want to do it, but not the drive to do it, if that makes sense.
No, yeah.
Like I don't want to hustle. I don't want to work 168 hours a week at something. I don't. Like I want to have time to do nothing.
Yeah.
And not have to hustle.
Yeah. So everything you do, you have to have a passion for, right? You have to be passionate about wanting to take photographs of shows and then write about the shows and then be able to, so run a website. Like just doing this little podcast that I have is like, it's a lot of work. It's almost like a full-time job.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's
absolutely.
like, all right, like, well, and everyone's like, well, what are your goals with it? I'm like, I don't know. Like and they're like, do you want to be like really big? And like, I'm like, I want the podcast to do well. So these like musicians get discovered. Like I want people,
exactly. Yep.
I want someone in Milwaukee to hear Coffin Salesman. I want, what I mean? Like I want like, like I had the band, the Scoffs on, like from Seattle. Like I want someone in, somewhere in the middle of Texas to hear that and be like, oh wow, that's really, you know what I mean? Like that's my goal. Like I just do this, and it started out as like we'll see what this is all about. And then during COVID and everything, like it was my lifeline. It kept me alive. It gave me purpose and stuff. And like, and now we're still doing it. And we got the website and it's a lot of work though. It's a lot of work. And like, I want to do more. And I'm like, all right, how do I gotta like basically sit down and map it all out. Like, how am I going to do more? What are we going to do and how are we going to do it? And this is,
yeah, and what your purpose is, right? Like, and how you scale that. It's not easy, and so we had to have some of those conversations when we not rebranded, but relaunched the website, because like the model that the Dying Scene was created under isn't sustainable anymore. It's just not. Like, we don't have the ability to have 3 or 4 shifts a day of writers volunteering their time to go through RSS feeds and mailboxes and whatever and look for new music and essentially be like an actual, like a non-AI news aggregate website. Because that's a lot of what Dying Scene was when it started. It was like a place to go, one central place to go to find punk rock news that wasn't punk news. And when we relaunch it, like the way that people consume media now has changed. The way that people access the bands that they like and the music that they like has changed. And so the old model that the site was started under wasn't sustainable. So then we were kind of like, okay, so what does that mean we do? Like, how do we function as the website going forward? And it really became more on like original content, like getting more contributors out at shows or taking pictures at shows, interviewing artists that they like, interviewing people that work at like record shops that they like, hey, this is my favorite indie record shop. Let's do a profile of that. Or label owners or people like other people tangential to the scene, but that still like feed the scene and make it what it is. Because the old models are different, and like like every Twitter feed is a news aggregate thing now. It's like AI generated bullshit. So like you'll find music news there. Like like you have Facebook, go use it. Like you'll find tour dates that way. And part of me misses that part of it, but otherwise, like it's just not sustainable that way. It's still a lot of work this way.
Right.
Because we have a I don't want to say a staff, because that implies that people are being paid, and like we're not being paid. So never mind the staff, but
contributors.
But we have contributors, that are like in various parts of the world, which is really awesome. Making sure that they all get out to the shows, or they get access to the things that they want, or they're plugging the bands. Like we have so many contributors in Chicago, which is awesome because I know nothing of the Chicago scene. I've learned more about the Chicago scene from my own website than ever, because we have so many contributors there. Why we have so many, I don't know, but I think they all become friendly, and they're all like, oh, well, Meredith's doing this cool stuff, so let me attach myself to her website, and then so we get this whole team there, which is really cool. But it wasn't by design. It just sort of became that organically. But then once you have contributors that have like a thing that they do well, it's like give them the freedom to do the thing that they do well, and just make sure it's still under the sort of umbrella of punk rock, I guess. And I have a very broad umbrella, and I think Cricket, my partner, thinks that it's a little too broad sometimes. I'm like,
the same way.
If you want to go to a show, like if it's a band that I've never heard of, fine, pitch it to me. Like I don't know every band. I'm never going to pretend to know every band. If there's a show you want to go to that I don't necessarily have never heard of the bands, like, okay, pitch it to me. Like why would Dying Scene cover that? And usually it's like, okay, fine, go do it. Yep. Nice. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little much. Like, I don't know. I'm not into like metal necessarily, and I think that some metal is a little bit outside the pale of, or beyond the pale of the punk rock. But whatever. If you want to go shoot a show, go shoot a show.
Right.
If there's a couple punk bands and a couple metal bands, fine. Well, like whatever. I don't care.
So how many contributors are on the website right now?
It varies. We've got probably 12 or 15 regular or semi-regular in the East Bay, so San Francisco, Oakland area, a bunch in Chicago, Denmark. I'm here in Boston, obviously. Cricket's in Denver. We've got a kid in Tampa. And so we've got one that might be starting up in LA. We've got a couple in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area. So we've had people in Australia over the years. We've had people in the UK over the years. So there's probably, I don't know, we kind of ask for a fairly minimum contribution on a monthly basis. But it's not like, because it's nobody's job. So we don't want people to get burdened with, oh, I have to do my 4 hours this month for Dying Scene or whatever. Like, but stay semi-regular, like contribute in the Discord at least, like so that we know that you're still alive, because inevitably a tour will come around and we'll be sort of photographer focused for a while, and then everybody wants to shoot Green Day. Well, okay, like we probably can't get photo passes to 7 different Green Day shows. So we're probably going to give it to A, people who are going to do good work, but B, people who have been contributing.
Right.
Like if you've been contributing, if you've shot a bunch of sweaty dive bar shows in Chicago, like you should probably, and you do good work, you should probably be the one to shoot Green Day in Chicago versus like somebody coming out of the woodwork. Hey, can I get a photo pass for them in Seattle? I was like, well, we don't have anybody there. Who are you? Like I appreciate you wanting to do that, but this, like, we've got a list.
Yeah. So do you have like so we would get like press releases all the time. You get all that stuff and everything now, right?
Yeah, and we lost access to, so when the site relaunched, we had to migrate servers and whatever, and hosting sites and whatever. And so we lost access to a bunch of the email addresses that we had for a long time. And then so have had to sort of recreate on the fly access to all those traditional mailing lists and whatever. So that's been a job in and of itself. Like this, like you said, a full-time job. It's a couple full-time jobs for a couple of us. But yeah, we get hundreds of press releases. And so we have some people who will just like look at, like, just try to keep up with the mailbag because you can't.
I was gonna say, yeah. Do you like divvy that out and like, how do you pick through like what's gonna get covered and what's not, or do you let the contributors kind of feel through it and figure out what they want to do?
Yeah, we want it to be their site as much as ours. Like because it's all voluntary for everybody. Like I don't want you to have to go to a show or review an album that you don't like. So we'll put it up in the Discord server, be like, hey, or like either me or Cricket will listen to things and be like, hey, I'm not going to review this, but somebody should. Or I know a couple of you like pop punk. I know a couple of you like hardcore. I know a couple of you like sort of like UK post punk stuff. So we'll sort of say, hey, check this out. Hey, check this out. Hey, check this out. So knowing what the contributor's taste is sort of helps with that. Yeah, it would be nice if it was if we had more people that wanted to do reviews, because I think that's where, a lot of the initial, like where Dying Scene made a lot of its initial bread and butter in the scene was like helping to break music like that. We just don't have a contributor lineup right now that is reviewer heavy, but I wish that we did. So if you're listening and you want to review records or albums or whatever, like email me.
Yeah. So when I was on the site, I noticed like there was like, I don't know, there was a section for like bands.
Yeah.
Like, are you a label too, or are you just kind of
Well, we were for a while. Dying Scene Records was a thing for a while, under Dave's jurisdiction when he was running the ship. And we put out, I don't know, maybe a couple dozen records digitally. And so he would split it like up to a certain point with the band, and then they just got all the proceeds after that. And we released them on Bandcamp and stuff like that. So, like, I think there were even a couple local bands. I wasn't involved with it, but there were a couple local bands that were on Dying Scene Records. Stray Bullets definitely put out a record on Dying Scene Records. So, yeah, that was. But so the band page thing, our idea was, because like a lot of us that are of a certain age, and that's usually how I word it now, like anybody, like if you're in your 40s or above, you're of a certain age. But the way that we all learned about a lot of punk rock records was like, you hear something you like because your friend had it, or whatever, their older brother had it.
Cassette.
And you went to the record store and you said, oh, I like that band that's on Lookout Records. Let's see what else Lookout Records puts out. So then you might have liked, like, Lookout Records obviously was big with Green Day, but that's how a lot of people discovered Mr. T Experience and Squirt Gun and a lot of bands like that. So Fat Records was the same, obviously. Epitaph was the same in the 90s. So you could find stuff through a record label and then look at who else is on their roster. And that is because it's the Wild West in terms of like who can release music and where. And because people don't go to the record store anymore, we wanted to make band pages and label pages so that people could investigate things that way. So if you find a band on Dying Scene and you realize, oh, they're on such and such a label, well, I'll just click on the label page and, oh, here's all the other bands that are on that label. So sort of like a modern way to access the same matrix.
Yeah.
Because if you're not going to so to me, that part's been really cool. So the old website had band pages. That was the goal from the beginning. And when the site caved in upon itself, we had like 8,800, I think is the official number, of band pages that totally vaporized.
Wow.
So all that got saved was the tag of the band's name. None of the information, none of the data, none of the pictures affiliated with them, none of the stories, none of the tags, et cetera, et cetera. Only the placeholder where their name was. So little by slow, we have had to rebuild the band page database from square one for 8,800 bands and like 1,500 labels and something like that. It's like, oh my God, why did we do this? But it's, to me, it's worth it. And we could start by like, we can tell contributors, like if there's a band you want to cover, good, make a band page for them. Like if we're going to cover them, awesome. Like, we'll cover whatever. Make a band page.
No, that's a good idea. Like just to having a database like that, because like when I was building the website for the podcast, like I had a similar like vision, but then like I was like, I just need to get this website up. I'll put that in later on if I needed to. But one of the things was like migrating all the podcast episodes over. I was like, I was like 200 and something episodes. I'm like, I can't do this. Like I archived one. I'm like, now you can find episode 1 through 250 over here. And then 250 and beyond is its own new feed. And I was kind of nervous about doing that because I was afraid like people weren't going to listen to me. And when I say, hey, you need to switch over, but it seems to be going all right, which is cool. It's just a lot. It's a lot of work. Like, I thought there would be an easier way just to put all the episodes on. There isn't. So
yeah, I've only dabbled my toe in the podcasting side of it, and I wanted to make it really, really rudimentary on purpose. Like, because I don't have the time or brain capacity, literal or figurative bandwidth to devote to learning a whole other thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I started doing it during COVID, just the interview show, and like because I thought I was an interview writer, and because the website had crashed, so we couldn't post new content to it. And then COVID happened. I'm like, well, I can still interview people. I can't host them in writing because the website was down, but let's turn it into a podcast. Let's stay connected to people. Sort of like you were saying that this has been a lifeline for you. How I used it for 50 something episodes of the interview podcast. Like, just, hey, checking in on people. How you doing? What's going on? Like especially during COVID when people in bands, like when they lost like we just lost our hobby, but there are people who lost their livelihoods. Yeah. Venues that shut down and bands that couldn't tour, and how are you going to make money, support your kids and whatever. So just like trying to highlight the things that people were doing to stay creative, to stay, like, if they were able to make money doing the little like pop-up online shows or whatever. And so yeah, that was the extent of me wanting to dabble my toe into the podcast world, was just like to stay talking to people and like let's focus on yes, it all sucks right now for all of us, and we have nothing to do except focus on how much it sucks because we can't leave our houses, and like the world's on fire and there's protests and whatever, and because it was all happening at the same time, and elections, but like, let's at least stay connected. Like, let's at least not lose that. Yeah. Let's not lose each other.
And I mean, it helps. It helps with the brand too. Like you're staying active. You're still out there, and that's what a lot of bands did, right? They did a lot of like let's do a Zoom show, or let's do these TikToks.
IG Live was big for a little while. Yeah. That's how I started my interview show, was just Instagram Live.
Oh, nice.
And then if I could save it, and then it turned into like, well, let's make it a little bit more of a podcast. Let's do it over Zoom, so at least it's recorded, because I definitely lost episodes doing it the IG Live way, because if you have fat thumbs like me and didn't hit save in time, then they poof. So unless you saw it live, you didn't see me talk to Miguel from Teenage Bottle Rocket about like his yoga practices and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of it too. Like, I feel like podcasting, you just get, people will get a different like view of like, you know what I mean? Like, they get more of like this, not just like the musician now. They're people like us, you know? So, is there any iteration of the podcast out right now, or are you like?
No, there should be. So Dying Scene Radio, which I don't even remember when it started, because I wasn't involved really in that part. I was doing my own thing with it. But so we had a guy who started Dying Scene Radio, let's say maybe 8 years ago. No, it's more than that now. And I listened to it once. So not to shit talk my own brand, whatever. I listened to it once or twice. I was like, I don't like this. I don't like this show. And it was hosted by a guy who became a person who stormed the Capitol. Let's put it that way. So like the guy who hosted the initial Dying Scene Radio, like he sweet talked Dave, the old owner of the site, into running this radio show, and he had a screen printing business, blah, 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 blah. And he was a real like MAGA piece of shit. Wow. So eventually like that died out, which prompted an interesting conversation that I had at a show in Boston once, in Somerville, at Thunder Road. Did you ever go to Thunder Road?
No.
It wasn't open very long. It was across from like Market Basket in Somerville. but the band the Svetlanas played there, and the Svetlanas they're Russian expats. I think they are not allowed to go back to Russia, so they were living in Italy or something like that. But they're like Russian hardcore band. And a friend of mine was outside, and he said, "Hey, the Olga and Diste from the Svetlanas are looking for you." And I was like, "Oh, that's like they're intimidated. Like, like look up the Svetlanas. They are intimidating." And I was like, "Oh, really? Why?" Yeah, and he was like, "Yeah, Olga doesn't seem happy." I was like, "Uh-oh." So I got confronted by, they're married. Olga and Diste, the lead singer and the lead guitar player, are married. And so she comes up to me. She's like, "Hey, you're Dying Scene, right?" I was like, "I mean, yes." One of the people is, and so she started shit talking the guy who was the host of the original Dying Scene Radio.
Yeah.
Because he was like, this is pre-MAGA, but he was like essentially MAGA, right? And he was shit talking Russia, and he was shit talking bands and whatever, and he was shit talking their band. So they got like super pissed at me for like, why did we let him have a show, and why did we let him use Dying Scene, like the label? And so I was like, no, he's like, we cut ties with him, like, because we had, but it was like, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get disappeared on the streets of Somerville tonight. It would end up being a great show. We had a good conversation, but
good.
So then my partner now, Cricket, he and our other like third original partner, Bobby, rebranded the podcast, like took it over, made it their own thing. So the episodes that you would have listened to if they were within the last probably 8 years, that was Cricket and Bobby. And so it was a much better and more cohesive and listenable podcast. And the goal was to have that as part of the new umbrella of Dying Scene, like to have a podcast channel where we would have Dying Scene Radio, and it would take the onus off of them to host Dying Scene Radio every week or 2 weeks or whatever. And we could have like a network of people under the Dying Scene Net Radio umbrella and host, so that we would essentially use our platform to host your podcast.
Yeah.
And then for a variety of reasons, it's just like, I think it became too big a boulder to push up the hill continuously. And so it's a thing that like so we have to remigrate the site to a new host in, I think, September. And so I think once we're stable on a host, then it'll be something like, I have to devote so much time to back end stuff on the website right now because of our current hosting situation. I think once we're free of that, then we'll be able to maybe get back into that. But we're hoping somebody would like take the ball and run with it. Hey, do you want to run Dying Scene Radio? Awesome, here it is. But then, life happens. Nobody's getting paid. People have kids. People have real jobs. Like, unless you really are a dork about it, like some of us are,
me,
like then it's exactly like. So it should be. It's like we still pay somebody to host Dying Scene Radio, the episodes that are still available online. I would like to get back to doing the interview sort of podcast thing. I just haven't. All my time has gone to the back end stuff and managing contributors, but I would like to. I miss that part.
So
I didn't think I would, but I miss it.
So the Dying Scene Radio was just like you played a couple songs and then did some like a radio show would be, Yeah, basically. So that you would have a conversation, and so it would be like if we had an hour-long conversation now, but like they would split it up and intersperse, like play 3, 4, 5 songs and then talk for a while. But it would be the same conversation a lot of times, just like with a few songs here and there. Yeah. And that's how a lot of people learned about a lot of cool music, like Snuggle,
myself included. Yeah. And then when I was a guest on that, which seems weird because it was part of my website, but I was a guest on that podcast at least once. And then so they would ask me like, "Oh, what songs do you want to play?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I don't know. Let's figure it out." And so I would be able to like plug music that I was interested in, or bands that I had just discovered, or like I think I actually put a Showcase Showdown song on there once because they were like they wanted something from the Boston scene. I was like, "You want Boston scene? Here's like, forget what song, but something from Showcase Showdown from the early days."
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So did you like with that? Did you need to do like ASCAP or anything like that?
I'm going to defer to Cricket on that.
So here's the deal.
I was not involved in that part.
We play music, right? This podcast plays music, and like we're going with independent artists, and like I've, and I get permission to use the song and everything. So that, but like there's some, who was it? Spotify. So are you familiar with like Recess Records?
Yeah.
All right. So Todd had a
Todd Conch. Yeah.
So he has a podcast, and like Spotify wouldn't, and it was all the bands he was in. He would play. It was a radio show, and he'd play songs with all the bands that he's in, or ones he puts out, and like Spotify would not let him on. So I was always like weird. I'm like, oh no, we're gonna get shut down. We haven't yet. Knock on wood, But
yeah. I don't have particular experience with that, except for doing the interview show. I was trading messages with Sam from the band Kali Masi, who are a Chicago band, who are awesome. They're one of my favorite bands. And they have recorded in the Boston area with a producer friend named Jay Moss, who records a lot of like hardcore, melodic hardcore. He was in Defeater for a long time. They record up in Haverhill. And so trading messages with Sam from Kali Masi, he's like, hey, you need a theme song for your interview show. I was like, oh, yeah, I do. I had never thought about it. And he's like, here, how about something like this? So he sent me a sort of reworked instrumental clip of a song from Kali Masi's last record, which is one of my favorite records. And I was like, that's actually perfect. So the intro and outro theme song to the interview show that I was doing was from this song called Hurts to Laugh by Kali Masi. Well, when you post it on YouTube, because I would post them, there was interviews like this, and a lot of times it would be video, so I'd post them on YouTube. And YouTube would flag them that I don't know how it noticed, but it noticed that the musical bed was part of this song by Kali Masi, and there was a copyright infringement. I was like, so every time I had to, like, YouTube has a process to like protest or whatever against copyright infringement cases. So every time I'd post an episode, it would get flagged for copyright. Jesus. And then I would have to appeal to and be like, I'll show you the email. Like, he sent it to me.
Right.
He doesn't care. Like, the guy who wrote the song gave me the song to use for this specific purpose. And so every single time I posted an episode, I would have to use that. It didn't come up on Spotify or anything like that. And I don't know what YouTube's algorithm is and how they would figure it out. But it would always be flagged to like whatever record label was Kali Masi was on. I was like, guys, this is the dumbest thing. He literally approached me about it and gave it to me. Like,
that makes me not even want to post anything on YouTube.
Like, it's such a pain in the ass.
It's just like so much. Just so much. Like, we have a TikTok. I have never done a TikTok a day in my life. And like, I was talking with someone yesterday, and they were telling me how like they make money off of TikTok. And one of the things that they do is like almost like a radio show, right? And the thing is with TikTok, if you're live, you can use music, but you can't post it as a video with the same music in it.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So I mean, but he makes money too. I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like there's things out there. So we do a little radio show on the Patreon. And I've been trying to get like the patrons involved. So like I've had one patron so far like come on with me, give me like the playlists, you know what I mean? And I just help them with their breaks and stuff like that. Like help them like, have them do like talk about the songs, then we'll do a little thing in the break. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's all for me. It's all make believe. It's all
oh yeah, right.
It's my career in radio that I never got.
Exactly. Yeah, we had our sites on a Patreon thing for a while too, or at least wanting to do one, because the idea is to have the site at least support itself, so that like we're not paying out of pocket to like every year to renew and whatever. So at least to make the site sustainable that way. And so we thought about doing a Patreon thing, but again, hoping somebody would like take the reins and say, hey, this is what we should do for Patreon and whatever. And someday we'll get to that point.
Yeah.
I'll keep writing checks until then.
So do you do any shows? Like, do you put on any shows or anything like that too, or no?
We did for the relaunch. So it was 2 years ago now, like quite literally right now. I think the anniversary of the Boston area show is 2 years ago this week. We did for the relaunch. So we did one in LA. We did one in Denver. We did one in Brooklyn. We did one in Chicago. And then the Boston area one was at the old Thirsty First in Lowell. which has since moved to a new location. But yeah, we did to sort of relaunch, and the proceeds from those shows kind of helped offset the cost of relaunching the website and the thousands of dollars we had to spend to developers and hosts and all that stuff. So we did that. It would be cool to do that again, to sort of have like a recurring series. But again, it's like, oh, another hat, like another thing to worry about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we have always been open to doing a lot of those things. It's just having the mental or physical capacity to do it.
Yeah. And
the back end of the site has been such a resource hog for like comically bad reasons. So once we can it's always like, once we can stabilize that part, then we can go on to the other stuff. But we have like 75% of a functioning website that has to be refreshed every single day. So for reasons that I don't understand, I just have to deal with them.
Is it all WordPress stuff? Is that why?
Yeah, it's all WordPress.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and then so like you spend all this money to relaunch a website and redesign it and whatever, and then people are like, yeah, but you should move from WordPress. I'm like, okay, but we just spent thousands of dollars on this site that functions 75% correctly sometimes. So
yeah, I spent so much. I had WordPress, and I really didn't. It's weird. I didn't really know how to do work WordPress, and like early on when the first iteration of this podcast, like I bought a WordPress or whatever, and like I kept buying I don't know. I had to keep upgrading because like I couldn't get the podcast on there, and it cost me like hundreds of dollars. And I was like, and I just like, no, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
That was it. Yeah. For a while there. So, but
I feel your pain.
So I'm on Squarespace now. I was like, I got to be able to go. I don't get WordPress, but like,
yeah,
I don't know. They're all the same, I guess, in the end. So. But
yeah, I mean, it does seem there is a part of WordPress that functions, I think, better than a lot of those other things when it comes to like when you're doing constant news stuff, when you're doing 2 or 3 or 4 news posts a day, and to have them sort of carouseled on the front of like that is a sort of WordPress exclusive thing to my knowledge.
I remember those things. Yeah. Because I remember like it would be. And you could like link to other people's feeds, so you have like a constant feed going too, right? So yeah.
We have a news feed, a news aggregate feed.
Yeah, that's a good option. That's a good thing to have.
It's a resource hog, man. But people, and if it wasn't for the fact that people actually look at it, because you can look at traffic, obviously. If it wasn't for the fact that people do actually land there and then back into the original content stuff that way, then it probably wouldn't be worth maintaining. But it is a thing that people use. So
yeah, that's awesome. Is there anything coming up that you want to talk about or promote, or are you just we're shooting for the fall? I don't think
so. I'm at the end of like a run of shows from April through May and the beginning of June. So I was just talking to somebody at a show last night. They're like, "Oh, what's on your calendar?" And I was like, wow, for the first time, there's nothing for a little bit. I'm gonna catch up. Really, is what I'm gonna do. Like there are a lot of our contributors are out at festivals and other shows and stuff like that. And there's one in Copenhagen coming up that we have somebody covering. There's a bunch of stuff in Chicago coming up that we have people covering. And so it's going to be kind of rededicating the focus to making sure that the contributors are covering all the stuff that they want and figuring out what they need for support. So yeah, just that. And then ultimately, hopefully we get to a new hosting site. So then we can finally rededicate efforts to the podcast thing and to selling merch and all that stuff.
Cool.
So, yeah. More of the same. Keep the engine moving.
Where can people find you? Where can they find Dying Scene? How do we find you on social media?
DyingScene.com. Everything's there. You can find. I know that we're on Instagram. I know that we're on Facebook. Just go to DyingScene.com. It's easy. Everything's there. Top right hand of the corner. You can find the Facebook. You can find the Instagram. You can find the podcast link. I think it links to Captivate, which is what we use to host the podcast. I think all that stuff is up there. Yeah, just go to DyingScene.com. It's all there.
Cool. Jay, this was awesome, man. Thanks for doing this. Man.
Thanks for having me. This is I'm glad that your show exists, and I'm glad that you do what you do.
Thank you. I'm glad that you do what you do, because like I said, and I was really happy Mike Kane made that introduction for us.
Yeah.
You know,
He's the best. Shout out to Mike Kane. I love him.
If you ever want to come back when it's time to like promote the other stuff, come on
Absolutely.
back. You know, maybe
Absolutely. Happy to.
Maybe I can convince you at some point to maybe we can collab on something. Maybe I don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
yeah.
We'll keep it. We'll keep this community rolling. You know.
Absolutely. Yep. That's what the community functions on nowadays is podcasts like yours and hopefully websites like ours. I know people look at it. So that's what keeps it going.
Yeah.
Like, Green Day is going to sell enough tickets at Fenway. They don't need our help. It's like,
yeah, it's all these other bands that
let's keep the actual scene, the people that are actually, and that's not the shit on Green Day. I actually like them, but you know, they're going to be fine either way. But you know, who needs support is Mike Kane, right? And Rebuilder and little bands, you know?
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
always been the lifeblood of this scene. So the more we can do to support those guys, because I can't play guitar for shit. So the more I can do to help support the scene, absolutely.
Me either. I can't either. So,
Right?
all right. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, man.
All right, and that's the show. I want to thank Jay again for being today's guest on the Struggling Artist Podcast. In the show notes, you will find links to dyingscene.com and their social media. Check them out. Give them a follow. And if you want to contribute, why don't you hit up Jay and ask if they need contributors. Always need good reviewers out there. Thank you to Chris Chavez for producing the podcast. Thank you to State Line Records for sponsoring the Struggling Artist Podcast. And thank you to all the people over at Patreon supporting us. If you want to see what we have going on over there, head over to patreon.com/podcast TSA. The tiers are inexpensive and it helps us put on shows, do events like we did with the Evening with Michael Caine, and some other projects we have going on in the future. And any kind of video or audio project that we do every patron becomes a producer of that, or executive producer of what we're doing. So that's cool enough, right? That's worth it. Totally worth it. Plus, we have a bunch of podcasts over there that you can check out that are exclusively on the Patreon. Thank you to everybody who listens to the podcast. If a podcast falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, does it even exist? I don't know what I'm saying. Thank you to everybody who writes in, reviews us, does the text thing on 774-570-1552, which is the Struggling Artist hotline, or who leaves voicemails on the hotline as well. That number is 774-570-1552. Who do you want to see on the podcast? Hit us up, text us, or leave us a voicemail. We'll not call you back, I promise. And maybe that guest who you want to have on will be on. It's happened before and it will happen again. All right, it's time to get out of here. We are going to play Loser's Circle, The Great Illusion of Time, off their album Took Long Enough. It is the theme song to this podcast. And I appreciate those boys always letting us use it. Until next week, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you then.